Hello and welcome to the Bloke channel. If you're having problems getting your EMAX Hawk 5 to bind to your Taranis transmitter, don't worry, it's probably not broken. The chances are you're in the EU or the UK and you've got mismatching firmware on your transmitter and your receiver. In today's top tip, I'll show you how to spot it and how to fix it. When I reviewed and set up this EMAX Hawk 5 recently, I discovered an issue with the firmware on the FrSky XM Plus receiver built into the Magnum F4 Flight tower, and I covered how to fix it. But I've had so many questions about this, I thought I'd make a separate video. Now, if you're in the EU or the UK, your Taranis X9D or your QX7 is probably flashed with the EU version of the firmware. This is the LBT, or Listen Before Talk protocol, required by EU telecoms legislation, and you should find there's a sticker like this on your transmitter. Now, if you buy a receiver from somewhere like Banggood, there's every chance it will be the international version, and the two don't talk, so you won't be able to bind your transmitter to your receiver and nothing will work. Usually there's nothing on the receiver to let you know what version it's actually flashed with. In the case of the Hawk 5, this uses the Magnum F4 Flight tower that has an integral FrSky XM Plus receiver. And EMAX don't offer an EU version, so it doesn't matter where you buy it, UK or not, it will always be the international version. Now, some manufacturers of bind-and-fly quads like ViFly offer both versions. So if you buy an X150 or similar from a UK supplier, it will probably just work. Another way to fix this would have been to flash the international version of the firmware on my Taranis X9D. But that would have meant I'd have needed to change all the receivers on all my quads. Not a great prospect really. And anyway, since I'm in the UK, I should probably stick to the EU version. Unfortunately, it's not difficult to find a fix. Here's how. So to bind the receiver to the transmitter, we need to put the transmitter into bind mode. So press menu, page to page 2 and scroll up. And we need to be in D16 mode, channels 1 to 16. And we select bind. 1 to 8 telemetry off is fine. There we are, it's chirping away. Now, this is a little bit difficult to see, but the way we bind is that we need to press this bind button here whilst applying power. So just gently press that down and plug in the USB lead. Now, I can immediately see there's a problem here, so let's just take that out to stop the annoying chirp. If this was binding correctly, we would have a solid green light and we would have a flashing red light, and we've got two solid lights. And what this is telling me, there's not actually anything wrong with this, but what it's telling me is that we are running different versions of the firmware on the receiver to the transmitter. It's a fairly common problem. This transmitter is running EU firmware and the receiver is running international firmware, and the two aren't compatible. So I have actually done another video on how to flash EU firmware onto the receiver to make it compatible with the transmitter. You check this link up here, this will show you how to do it. I will get this apart and update the firmware on this XM Plus so it works correctly with the transmitter. To fix this problem, we're going to need to flash the EU version of the firmware onto this XM Plus receiver. Now, unfortunately, because this XM Plus is actually part of the F4 Magnum tower, it's soldered on with these interconnect pins, so removing it to put the cables that we need on here to connect it to our Taranis to flash the firmware is going to be too much surgery. So what we're going to do is make up a cable and solder direct to these pins. And just taking a quick look at the instructions here that we came with the Hawk 5, we've got 3 connectors here which are S-bus, plus 5 volts and ground, and we will connect those using a servo cable. This is just a standard servo cable which you can get anywhere. You may have one kicking around already, but there is a little trick that we have to do. We're going to need to swap over these 2 cables here. At the moment this goes S-bus, positive, ground, and the way this connects in the back, as you'll see in a moment, is that it actually goes the other way around. So we're just going to swap those over very quickly. It's pretty easy to do. There we go, so they're swapped over. You'll see why in a minute. So we need to solder onto these 3 pins here. So I'll just use, we just go in here like this. And the way the connections goes, S-bus, which is going to be white. And 5 volts, which is red, and ground, which is black. You don't have to worry too much about being really good joints, they just need to be connected and not shorted. This is only temporary. Okay, so when you do this, check and double check the wiring, because you don't want to blow this up. So if you remember, the pins reading down are S-bus, plus 5 and ground, which is white, red and black, and we're going to need to connect these into the back of our Taranis. Now I already had a cable. This is my standard cable I use for flashing different receivers, but unfortunately we've got an S-port connector which isn't going to work there. And if we look on the back here, we have got 5 pins. The top 2 aren't used. I'm running from the bottom. I've already marked these up. This is something I've done quite a few times, so I've actually put it on here. So it goes signal, minus, positive, and that matches up with these. White signal, black minus or ground, and red, which is positive. So we're going to check and double check. So it's red, black, white, white, red, black, which is good. So to get the firmware, the easiest way to do this is if you go to frskyrc.com, go to products, receivers, and we are on the XM series. And it's XM Plus, and we need to go to the download area. Here we go, firmware. Now this download package here is the latest one, end of March 2017, and this includes the key things here are FCC are the international versions, and LBT, or listen before talk, are the EU versions. So if we download this package here, we will get everything. Just click on that. There we go. Now I'm just going to copy this to the location where I keep all my firmware downloads, XM Plus, and expand this. Obviously if you're using a Windows machine it's going to be slightly different, but it's the same procedure. We can get rid of that, we don't need it any longer. So here are the firmwares for the various different versions, but we're going to grab that guy there, that's the one that we need. So we've got this firmware sitting on our computer. We need to put it onto the SD card which is on the Taranis. The way to do this is to get your USB lead in your computer. Oops, get it right around. And put the Taranis into bootloader mode, which is just holding both trim tabs in and turning on. This is the mode you need to be in, and whilst it's in that mode, connect your USB cable to your computer. It says yes, be connected. Now if we go back to our computer, you'll find that there are now two drives which you see. One here, which is Taranis, and these will probably be named differently on your machine. It's just the way I've chosen to name them. This is actually the operating system, if you like, the EEPROM internal to the Taranis, and this no name down here, this is actually the SD card. And what we need to do is copy the firmware that we just downloaded, and we're going to pick the LBT, which is the EU version, not these specific versions here, and copy it onto the SD card on our Taranis. And we need to paste that onto our SD card. So we go to firmwares and paste, and there we are. That's the XM Plus firmware, listen before talk, which is the EU version. So that is now on the SD card on our Taranis. So that's great. We can disconnect our USB and we can exit.
Welcome to OpenTX.
Excellent. So the way we actually do the flashing, we've got our new firmware sitting on the SD card in the back of our Taranis, and we are going to flash it using this cable onto the receiver. So if we connect this up as we had it before, we need signal at the bottom, ground or black negative in the middle, and red, which is power at the top. Check, double check, check, double check. So if you long press the menu key, gets into the radio setup, and hit page, that takes us to page 2 of the menu setup. Scroll down to firmwares, which is where we stored that firmware, and you'll see here, this is the one we just put on here, XM Plus LBT, and that's the latest version. Scroll down, long press enter, and you want to choose flash external device. Just press enter, and there we go. You can see that it's actually powered up the XM Plus. We've got a couple of LEDs flashing here to indicate that the software is being uploaded from the transmitter to the receiver, and we get a progress bar on the screen. We just sit and wait. Excellent, that's done. It's powered off the receiver. We can disconnect our cable from the back. Fiddly, there we go. And we've now got the latest firmware, hopefully the EU firmware, flashed onto this board. We don't need this connector anymore, so let's just unsolder that. So hopefully now we should be able to successfully bind our transmitter to our receiver. Okay, let's go through this again. Hope we're all okay. So let's turn the transmitter on.
Welcome to OpenTX.
And go to page, scroll up, and again we are in D16, channels 1 to 16, and we're going to bind. Telemetry off is fine. So that's chirping away. And if you remember, what we need to do is to press and hold the bind switch here while simultaneously connecting power. There we go. Hope you can see this. This is different from last time. If you remember, we had a solid green light and we had a solid red light, which indicated it wasn't correctly bound. We've now got a solid green light, and a flashing red light which indicates that it has bound. And we can check this by going to our transmitter, pressing exit to take it out of bind mode. We can turn our transmitter off. We can disconnect the power from our quad. Now we need to make sure these aren't too close together. So let's turn our transmitter on.
Welcome to OpenTX.
That's good. Now if we connect power to our board, there we go. The solid green light, we've got no red light flashing or solid, we've just got a solid green light, which means that these are talking to each other. So flashing the EU version of the firmware onto this board, as I suspected, fixed the problem. So we can now get on and set up our board. If you found that useful and you want updates, please like and subscribe to the channel down here. It really does help me make better content. And do let me know what you think of this quad in the comments. I'll see you next time.